This is a production of Cornell University.
Thank you so much, Andy, and thank you everyone for being here. Is it circular bionutrient economy or is it the pizza? Either way, I appreciate your being here. So I'd like to thank the section of Soil and Crop Science for the invitation and to say that it came about because I'm trying to recruit a student who's a real circular bionutrient economist. And this section would be a better host for her. She'd rather become a soil scientist than a plant pathologist. That was the consensus. But really, my desire to be part of this family arises from the deeper considerations that Andy outlined. I think of myself as in part of this sort of One Health framework, that planetary health is determining soil health or influencing soil health, which influences plant health and which influences human health. And so seeing myself within that, I'm sort of shifting from the plant health to the soil health, which seems to be something that's going on in the broader SIPS community. This word cloud that these word clouds that Joss presented at the 10th anniversary party, show 2020. I'm working solidly on genomics of resistance, and by now much more interested in soil carbon. So I wish I could say I was driving that change, but I think I'm just reflecting maybe a shift in interest that's broader than myself. But my interest in bionutrient circularity, I share with a number of people in this room. And I'm very keen to help as we try to improve our internal capacity for analyzing nutrients, contaminants, and other materials internally here in SIPS and at Cornell, because I think a lot of us are suffering from limitations in that regard. So today I'd like to talk about this idea of circular food systems, circular bionutrient economy, as Andy mentioned, the professional pivots that got me to this place, and sort of some initial progress in a long process, explorations, experiments, some of the downside risks, how can change happen here and in Africa as well. And before diving in, I want to thank the wonderful colleagues in my lab. I think Christina, known to many of you, could be thanked for much of what I'll be showing, and Forrest, our lab manager, and we've got a great team of people, many of whom are undergraduates, some of whom are present here. Johannes's lab is important, key collaborators in this area, Xuan Liao in global development as well, and Charles Midig is my lead partner in Kenya, and we have the pleasure of working with the Rich Earth Institute and the wider Soil Factory Network on this sort of topic. So the basic proposition that I'll be putting forth today is the idea that we would redirect our bodily nutrients, particularly from urine, from the aquatic environment to agriculture. So now, since we direct those nutrients into the aquatic environment, it's a hazard for that. You got harmful algal blooms, eutrophication, and so on. And in many situations, the land and agriculture are suffering from depletion of nutrients and carbon, or nutrients in this case. So the extent to which this is a big deal depends on the context. So globally speaking, urinary nutrients would account for around 19% of the synthetic nitrogen that we put on our crops, about 11% of the phosphorus. And in the US, it's sort of a bit less than that because we import and export so much nutrient in the form of food and fertilizer. But in many African countries, it's the amount of nutrients in the urine there would exceed the amount of nutrients they apply as synthetic fertilizer. And so they could do much better with agriculture if they were redirecting their nutrients. And so I don't know if any of you have seen the piece we have on the Ag Quad for some festivals, but with Johannes's squad, we're like able to show with that in New York State, if we could take the urinary nutrients from New York City and apply them, it would cover much of the nutrient requirements of New York. In Paris, the agricultural environment around there, which is a lot, could completely suffice its nitrogen needs and about half its phosphorus needs if it used Paris's urban urinary nutrients. Anyway, so where you are, the details depend, but it's generally, I think, a proposition worth considering. So I was standing on a bridge in Niamey, Niger, a while back, watching this camel come into town with a bunch of a load of cowpea haulms on his back. There's a festival coming up. And I'm thinking, how long can this go on? They're bringing all the carbon and nutrients from the already depleted agricultural soils into the city where it's, winds up as being pollution for the urban and aquatic environments. And globally speaking, 2.3 billion people lack even basic sanitation, and 80% of excreta go untreated into the waterways while we're further depleting our agricultural soils. Like this, the fundamentals are untenable here. And then, so I'm thinking like, how can this, what can we do about this? And then later on, I'm with these farmers and this is actually from a video taken with my son, but this farmer group, 10,000 farmer group led by Aminu Ali here, they were asking themselves that question, like where are we going to get our nutrients? And so they started applying urine to their fields, and it's gotten to be a big thing now. So I was really inspired by them, but then I realized, well, actually, it's not just some back of beyond people in a remote, difficult situation. They're doing that. The French are super into it. They've got companies that are making fertilizers from urine. They've got an entire neighborhood of Paris that's plumbing for this. I kind of like the way they show that yellow gold rush. They got style, of course, and even the way they show the fact that most, in terms of the food that we take in, the nutrients we take in, most of them come out, most of the NPK come out in our urine, relatively little in our feces. In contrast, from the micronutrients are coming out more in the poop. So we have risk of having not enough of some of those micronutrients if we use urine as a fertilizer. I also really like the way these Swiss are showing this bigger vision of, okay, food comes into the city from the countryside. It should be coming out as biowaste. This is their kind of signature move for how to technically pull it off. The carbon and nutrients should return to agriculture. And I think you'll recognize that as, a plea for sort of circularity in the food system. So we live in a indescribably wasteful era. I mean, the more you think about it, don't think about it as much as I do, it'll wreck your head. But so this is provoking a lot of people to start thinking about circular economy. How can we design out waste, keep materials in circulation, and regenerate nature? This being a very powerful thought, these being very, practicable tactics and stuff. So people generally distinguish between how you go about it for biological materials and how you go about it for technical materials are quite different. In terms of the literature on circular economy, I did a citation search, and you find that over the last few years, 27 to 2013, you go from 800 and some to 8,000 and some citations per year. But most of them, the vast majority, are about the technical materials, and only 15% have relevance to the food system, as indicated by searching circular economy and food system, nutrient, or agriculture. So we're bringing up the rear, and it's more complicated. People often think of circular economy as these neat loops, phone to phone, carpet to carpet. For organic materials, it's more like this beautiful tangle of these different things. And this is from a nice paper about contaminants. So it's complicated operationally, materially, it's complicated downside risk wise. And we have fewer tactics at our disposal. If you're going to be doing technical materials, you can reuse, repair, refurbish, remanufacture, repurpose. But if you're looking at biologicals, you're with a much smaller set of R words. But we as Johannes has pointed out, we can also kind of simplify the concept for how do we bring the carbon and nutrients that we in our food system back to the soil and then back to our food. And I think in some ways, in some moments, that allows us again to simplify. And plus, a lot of this work is done by organisms. So while it's conceptually more complicated, it's technically a lot of times more easy because your biology is doing the work for you. Okay, so this is while a minority of circular economy literature, it's still a very happening literature. I don't know if people remember Achim Doberman's talk here a few years back. So he's got synthetic fertilizer as the foundation of the circular food system, or circular-ish food system. But he's pointing out that we could do much better about bringing co-products from animal and plant agriculture back into animal and plant agriculture. But he notably sort of wouldn't acknowledge excreta in this vision. So Johannes and I call him up afterward, like, Achim, what's up with that? He and I worked at the International Rice Research Institute millions of years ago, and we co-wrote SDG2. So I'm like, Achim, this is not our first dispute. but he wasn't budging. He's not ready for it. He is interested though in animal nutrients. Anyway, Johannes is working on them. Stay tuned. But so here is my, kind of simplified view of the conventional linear food system. I guess crops are around 70% dependent on synthetic nitrogen at this point. They go through crops, livestock, and people, your veg or otherwise. And we have these massive byproducts, crop residues, animal and human excreta, and food waste, and more. And then a lot of really hideous harms. Deforestation because of the inefficiency of the system, greenhouse gases driving climate change, nutrient pollution, destroying our aquatic ecosystems. These are no joke. If we're looking at the planetary boundaries, it's nutrient pollution and contaminants that are kind of two of the blockbuster horrible things that we need to work on. So I think we are working on them, and we need to be. And I think circularity is one of the ways we can improve here. So if we look at these 3 byproducts of the food system, we just put in a paper from our NIFA team. Just in the USA alone, human and animal excreta pose a $5+ billion a year opportunity. So I'm calling those the organic underutilized resources, just because it sounds ours. Sounds kind of nice, even though it's slightly perverting the thing. So how can we make use of those materials better? So doing anything as demanding as, circularizing the food system has many frontiers: technical, legal, regulatory, operational, socio-cultural. So starting where we are, we're technical people. Well, we can use, if we're clever enough to use a series of transformation approaches together, we can turn those waste products into resources. They're to some extent used as resources anyway already. We could do a lot better. Biological processes like composting, anaerobic digestion, black soldier fly larvae, livestock in general, pigs and chickens and whatnot, can transform these organic wastes into useful foods. Those processes just go better with biochar. Every biology works better with biochar, and biochar works better if you've dried and chopped and pelleted your material. So how can we bring these together to more efficiently circularize the food system? So we've got these 3 material transformations, and we're looking to turn a whole bunch of ours, including the 3 I've mentioned, but also invasive species, agro-industrial products and byproducts and more, into feed, food, fertilizer, etc., soil amendments, in order to improve food security, carbon sequestration, reduce emissions, provide sanitation, improve public health and employment. In order to make all that happen, we not only need this sort of technical angle, but we need a lot of social, to really transform the food system. We've got to change how we think and feel about excreta and other wastes, how we process. We're so centralized, and these are low value, gross, messy things, and centralized models really can't make any sense with that. And obviously there's a lot of legal regulatory change that needs to happen to make this possible. But so we need to conceive of that. Luckily, there's some nice synergies that can be found amongst these methods. Carbon and nutrients play nice together. Biochar and biology, as I mentioned. If you start co-localizing activities and coordinating sectors, it can start to actually pick up speed and make sense. We have a lot of work to do to make all that happen. But it's worth it, I would say. So this is sort of an eyeful of what a circular version would look like, with maybe these biological and thermochemical processes together, making these waste products sort of work for soil and crops, for people and animals, and including insects. Okay, so how did I come to this view of things, priorities? This kind of summarizes why I was working in maize genetics, and there's only so much genetics can do when your soil looks like that and acts like that. And it's not only a poor yield, but it's a poisonous yield that you get when it looks like that. I really enjoyed those years of maize genetics, starting with trying to understand the inheritance of a suite of diseases that affect, our major crop in the United States as well as in Africa. Got really sucked up in these ear diseases that provide these pervasive toxic effects. you know, and how the specific traits of the ear and the plant determine resistance to those fungal pathogens and their mycotoxin products. So we did a whole bunch of stuff, a lot of genetics and some grain sorting work and other stuff. But I came to the view that there are a lot of trade-offs involved. So for genetics and breeding, for grain sorting and biological control, there's massive, clear trade-offs. And the win-win that I could spot was enhancing soil health and working with people to improve system health. Just a couple of glimpses of our results that are relevant. A Kenyan student worked with a CIMMIT to look at a couple of places in eastern Kenya, and just highlighting here, the same season, low nitrogen and high nitrogen, all the mycotoxin the aflatoxin indicators here, and also true for fumonisin, are way worse with the low nitrogen than the high. And looking over here at a different site, the low nitrogen looks a lot like the low nitrogen here, but with even more astronomical levels of aflatoxin. Then with an eye in the sky, we could actually predict, based on available soil parameters and drought indicators, we could predict to some extent aflatoxin in a few surveys that we've published in these papers. Will's paper came out right before he lost his job, USAID, unfortunately. But this made me feel like toxic grain is a symptom of these larger challenges. We've got soil depletion and drought that come together to stress our plants, and that leads to, again, poor yields and toxic yields. And what looked to me initially like proud to be so integrated about our mycotoxin work to looking quite inadequate. We really have to go before the season and look at soil health and resilience after the season to look at surveillance from satellite data, crop data, but also bioindicators of mycotoxins. And I started to feel like we're strapping urine bags on babies and going to hospitals for urinary aflatoxin biomarkers. And like, wouldn't it be nice to have source separating sanitation that could also contribute to a surveillance program? So I ended up thinking, well, shoot, if I've got to handle the urine anyway, why would I do it in a baby bag? Why not, do it as part of an integrated circular system where we're monitoring the crop, the food, and the body, and we're using the body product again to fight the problem. So how can we build that soil health? Where can we get that soil carbon and nutrients? I think you can probably guess where I'm going with that. So back to those people in Niger. I was really proud that my program was funding this farmer organization and supporting them not only to come up with, we didn't support them to come up with the idea. They came up with well, yes, we did. We got an agronomist talking to the farmer leadership who suggested urine as an alternative. It was not popular initially, but after a few years, hundreds of farmers are using urine as a fertilizer, and they're able to publish their results with this. The first author there is a young woman. That is not a normal thing in that culture, but so I was real proud of how that worked out. So this inspired a lot of other people to at least consider that. The film that my son made was prompted by Beth Manvecchi, a graduate from this department. Janice knows her, and Beth brought that video to East Africa to lobby the farmers in the East Africa to consider these findings, and slow going but making progress. And then this is another thing I was pleased about from my McKnight. I was a scientific director for a couple of decades, and that Niger work was something I like. And in response to that, I asked this other group I worked with them to get them a grant, and they're looking here in another West African country. This is Burkina Faso. This is Ouagadougou, sort of the agricultural area around it, and the broader Burkina. They bring in a bunch of nutrients into Ouagadougou from the hinterlands, and then they say urination constitutes, that's major uncontrolled nitrogen flows, by far the fattest arrow coming out of there. Urination, this is from the end of the abstract, urination constitutes the dominant nitrogen loss pathway, and urine collecting initiatives could provide valuable fertilizer adapted to local agricultural requirements and constraints, increasing the urban system sustainability by enhancing regional food provision, as well as reducing sanitation-induced water pollution. So the first author was a guy I learned a lot from when I was on sabbatic in France. And I appreciate the way they sort of worked this out. So it isn't just, West Africa. There's a dynamic, this is sort of a very old idea. And, pleasing government and grandma, the idea of projecting the beauty of bodily circulation and projecting the practicality of it, why the heck we can't do that and spare no accumulation of phosphorus, nitrogen, and carbon compounds in our waterways. So this is nothing new. We're just trying to gain momentum here. Hard to do in the United States for some reason, but when the conflict started in Ukraine, now 3 years back, I got interest from a New York Times reporter who's a friend of my kids, and she wrote that article about pea cyclers. There immediately spawned a rash of other propaganda, other articles in various, I shouldn't say that, but one of them was about the work in Niger, which I was really pleased about that. Anyway, so this is sort of becomes part of my mindset. How do we make change? Partly it's sort of getting our fabulous work into the news. Okay, so what are we up to around here? So if you think about pea, you can either use it as is, but it's heavy and low value, or you can make it into a fancier fertilizer. So if Johannes and I, John, he represents this side more, and I'm more over here, but we both are fans of both, I suppose. So my thinking about the just using pea as is was really focused on an interest in that peri-urban population. So 40% of humanity lives in peri-urban areas. Many of these people are living in slums, informal settlements. These peri-urban areas are like too dense maybe to farm, but here there's some space to grow things. You're told to go, implement this kind of garden, but then the soil people have access to is full of heavy metals. Can we use crop residues together with excreta to be able to do this, but safely? So I started with straw bale gardening because it's kind of a thing. I'm calling it grow as you go or you go gardening because of the pea component. I loved my Musgrave farm manager for support, not only tolerating, but supporting me to get going on this while I was trying to be, the maize genetics continues. You might not have seen the somewhat mediocre straw bale gardening there at Caldwell as well. So that was sort of exploratory. Then we sort of shift into more experimental mode here. My Musgrave farm manager introduced me to the Dillman Hill farm managers with the hint that was a much more appropriate place to work. Dillman Hill has a legacy of heavy metals from its time as a piece of the orchard, where they're using arsenic and lead as pesticides in the orchard business. So working on raised bed gardens or similar makes a lot of sense there psychically, and the student environment's great there. Jesse's here somewhere, I think. So just a couple of messages from that work so far. Sort of leaning on 2023 and 2024 findings from our Dillman Hill machine. First off, plant, the kale in 2023 grew similarly with urine as with Miracle-Gro on soil. So urine is good fertilizer up to a point. But our substrates really suck. So this is wheat straw. Oh, not so good. Really bad with urine, way worse than with Miracle-Gro. But in general, Miracle-Gro and urine are par on maize stover and on soil. But our organic substrates are looking really not competitive here. Jensen there. So we did a little experiment mixing up, comparing virgin wheat that was in the barn with weathered wheat that was sitting around outside for a year or so, with composted wheat that we'd used for the straw bale gardening, with fine stover and a mix of those two, and with and without biochar here. And basically, you have to kind of age, the wheat quite a bit to get to what fine stover is on day one out of the barn. And there's sort of a hint there, not significant, but maybe blending is better. No biochar effect detected. The regulatory authority thought it was going to be World War III when we applied urine on the plant science barn after a considerable struggle with the authorities. And after a tough start for the best guess our substrate, which is now a mix of composted wheat, compost, and different levels of biochar, we actually came out on par, slightly ahead of the commercial potting mix across that trial, and looked like it. No World War III. Really, you don't smell pee after like the first immediate application if you put it on a soil or soil-like substrate. Okay, so generally, pee works well. Our hours worked well if you blend them right. So we're trying to kind of pit bionutrient circularity against conventional. They've got the high yields. We've got these other arguments. They've got a lot of, the dings on them that I mentioned in the downsides presentation. But we got a bunch of downsides too. And one of them might be that there's a lot of salt in our diets and therefore in our urine. So there's a bunch of other problems as well. So hitting the salt here, I'm just looking at the kale tissue. Yeah, the kale came out saltier on wheats, more so on the hours than on the soil. The substrates came out saltier, the hours and also on the soil. But we didn't really have a big effect on the yield. We're doing some washout experiments I'll mention here. So this last year we did 3 different experiments: a lettuce, a tomato, and a lettuce experiment. I'm sorry showing the tomato because I won't say anything further about that for the moment, but just to show that on this incredibly bad looking mix of wheat, straw, maize, crudely chopped maize stover right off the combine, and so some compost plus or minus biochar, the plants really are pretty indifferent. I mean, they're quite competitive with soil, which is totally weird and unexpected. So again, we're benchmarking well in terms of lettuce yield. Soil's a little worse off here, probably because we overdosed the synthetic a little. The synthetic on soil, because I think we did a little initial overdosing. But you can see that it's growing quite well. Urine versus Miracle Grow here. So looking now at water flush level, we'd put up the high tunnel at Dillman so we could manage the water, trying to explore this issue of what about the salt levels. And so this is the first lettuce season on the organic underutilized resources. More water is better. More water is better on hours on soil. And this is, sorry, on, I screwed that up, did I? No, oh, sorry, urine, synthetic nutrient, hours soil, hours soil. So the urine is doing sort of better overall and more water is better. So is it a salt thing? It seems like not, as far as we can tell. This is one of the few cases where we get a biochar effect, because usually we're not stressing it. It seems biochar steps to the rescue apparently when there's either water, nutrient, or too much ammonia stress. In this case, this is the low flush, medium, and high flush, different amounts of water per 20-liter sac. And the urine treatment, I thought would be getting better over the time, but with no biochar, it's getting worse by this 3rd season, and it's much worse with a high washout. So maybe the biochar is just holding nutrients for that crop, when the high washout is just washing nutrients out of this is all the hours. So anyway, that's the only significant effect here. But it is quite striking that our third season with this same set of sacs are starting to look pretty shabby with urine. So there's something is maybe there's something that we need to amend. Possibly those micronutrients that are initially supplied by the organic materials and they're not adequately provided in the urine. Anyway, so glad that Jesse's here, because he and colleagues and Christina, we're also exploring this idea that we can frame this issue as a matter of nutrient sovereignty for people for whom that concept is meaningful. So our buddies in New York feel like that kind of resonates with them. The Black Gardeners organization, they like that concept apparently. And so this is an experiment with some indigenously crops of interest to the indigenous students that Jesse's representing, and that's skunk beans and tobacco and ceremonial tobacco. And these are urine plus or minus wood, urine and synthetic plus or minus wood vinegar. And we're testing other fert against fish effluent from the aquaculture enterprise, frass from the black soldier fly enterprise. And the tobacco showed a strong yield effect where synthetic and urine were fine and these others were not. Beans did not show a strong yield effect, but they showed a very strong protein content effect, percent nitrogen effect. So I thought that was quite interesting and notable that these pale plants, clearly weren't getting enough nutrient in these treatments, the fish effluent and frass. And they responded by just having more carbohydrates and less protein. So anyway, going forward, we're looking at how different ingredients, especially non-ours, how the biochar, the mineral component that we could dope in there, and fertigants can influence the biology, the chemistry, and the physics of the situation. We're looking at Christina's leading work on nematodes and fungi. Forrest is work with Steve Vanek on ecoplates to look at the bacterial populations and communities, better understanding the chemical situations here and some of the physical transformations that occur, size particle distribution shifts and how they occur. So we're excited about some of the experiments we have on greenhouse gases in particular now in this winter. Christina's done a bit of work on that on a larger scale, thinking here about what are the implications for these matters when you're looking at composting at domestic and municipal scales, which is a big deal because legally you have to compost if you're a big operation in New York State, Vermont, everybody has to compost everything organic. And it's not going to be all you go gardening. Do we have implications for larger scale composting? And here Christina's comparing leaves without biochar fertigated with water or urine, leaves with 5% biochar, water and urine. And you can see that without biochar, urine is getting a lot more nitrous oxide, powerful greenhouse gas, and that's not the case when the 5% biochar is there. So this is very preliminary, A. B, it's also expected based on the literature. C, I think it could be a big deal because I'm a master composter. I didn't hear word one about biochar the entire master composting training, and I feel like, yeah, we should be, Janice, we got to put this in here. And we know that composting can lead to high greenhouse gas emissions, especially you start using urine, which I'm pushing for. But biochar and mineral additives can reduce GHG production during composting. This again is, somewhat established, not to Jean Bonatel's satisfaction apparently, but we learned about green, brown, green, right? Green and brown composting sandwiches. I think it should be black and gold, That's my cereal residues. Anyway, so I think there are practical implications there that we could work on. And we are sort of reaching into the community with our You Go Gardening at the Soil Factory. These are pea-powered raised beds with yard waste and whatever we've got stuffed inside. We put urine around we frame it in straw bales and put urine on the straw bales. And then between seasons, dump that now onto the garden and rebuild it with new straw bales. Nice indigenous gardening component to that, really nicely. And then this is sort of some of those same types of gardens up here at the Gilman Hill Student Organic Farm. Again, because it's suitable because of that contaminated soil legacy, we were, liaising with our friends and family down in New York to see, does this have implications for green cities? They're interested in using biochar in the Bronx, and that it's Kwesi Joseph's terms. So I think we got a nice collaboration sort of inching forward in that regard. Anyway, so how about contaminants? I'm not going to say much about it, but there is some emerging literature. People often ask, what about pharmaceuticals? We take in a lot. They come out, just like our nutrients come out in our pee, so do our pharma. Anyway, there's some initial indication from other groups that this high nitrogen fertilizer value and low uptake of pharma is probably not fair to just leave it at that, but I will leave it at that for now. I did spend a year working on this National Academies panel about exploring linkages between soil health and human health, and contamination was one of the big themes that came out there. So that gave me a chance to kind of get on the boards with my mycotoxin point, the links between soil health and mycotoxins, this point about excreta. But just this issue of contaminants is huge in soil health more broadly. Nothing, with or without anything to do with what I'm talking about today. And yet this circularity will only compound those concerns. And I just want to point out that one of the rays of hope that our committee found was that pyrolysis, in my primitive realization here in a Kontiki, at any scale, the process of heating material organics at really high temperatures can break bonds in organic contaminants, your pharma, your PFAS even, and also the product is helpful in immobilizing the same bad things, including non-organic contaminants, heavy metals and stuff. So this is something that I think is important in that regard. So oops. I wanted to update you a bit also about what I'm most excited about, which is what we've got going on in Kenya, both in rural and in urban contexts. So I'm bringing you here to the Republic of Kenya and its little corner of Lake Victoria. So that's Lake Victoria. The Kenyan corner has this little pinch-off thing called the Nyanza Gulf, where you're getting increasing likelihood of harmful algal blooms as you get a little piece of the lake pinched off. You can see that they're becoming increasingly likely wherever people meet the lake. So land and lake are not friends here. The simplest thing you could do is just put pea on the farms. So this is going on in Mumias here. So I'll start in Mumias and then take us down to the city. But the farmers were not super keen. They thought that was gross. When we discussed all the possible things you can do if you're able to source separate urine, you can put on your crop, on your raised bed, your compost, or you can make this nice fertilizer. They were down with the compost angle. They know they need to improve their soils. They're making compost and they're like okay with the idea of doping it up with their bodily nutrients. They got super pumped about this. If you're in Mumias now and you pee, you're a kid and you pee here or there like you always used to do, you are in trouble because you need to be gathering that up for your crops. So they're big into the composting. They form a farmer research network. They've got formal experiments, informal experiments. The farmer leader Harun here, still wearing his badge from our CBEN meeting. He dug out all the pitla trees and he included the material. Ooh, I know, as a way out ahead of me. I'm like also not happy about that, but it worked great, I gotta say. Anyway, they're going gangbusters. Now moving back to Kisumu on that Nyanza Gulf, we got excited about the, hot quenched. There's some evidence from the literature that hot quenched biochars performs particularly well, so it should be hot quenching. In 3 years of experiments, the pea quenched biochar was performing with the chemical fertilizer against the water quenched and control. And we want to improve the rigor and design of these experiments, but we're encouraged by the fact that this stuff is performing well so far. And what we want to take it bigger now. Kenya is the home for the biggest source separating sanitation company in the world, Sanergy. They service over 150,000 plus people in Nairobi. They make fertilizers and black soldier flies and other products from the poop there. They dump the pee. So they're already showing that you can tie up sanitation and fertilizer production there to some extent. And they've got a branch that's moved out to Kisumu out in Western Kenya. And this is their toilet factory on the wastewater treatment plant territory. They also have in the same town, really vibrant community-based organization called Kisumu Young Agripreneurs. That's Roy who runs it. And they've got black soldier flies producing all these agri inputs and consolidating product. And so, obviously, I had a bright idea that they could team up. So last time I was in Kenya, we all came to the table, our dining room table at our shack there. So that's Florence, who runs Fresh Life in Kisumu. That's Roy, who runs at Kia. That's Charles Midega, my big collaborator. This individual is paid by Johannes to coordinate the regional circular bionutrient economy network, Eric Bala. That's you may know Bella from here, who also co-runs that network. And they're like, heck yeah, let's do it. So here's that map of the Nyalenda informal settlement slum there, reaching out to the water body there, the wastewater treatment plant and agriculture here, and the more middle class neighborhood here. So Florence provided the GPS locations of all the toilets they service in this slum neighborhood. And Keith at Mann Library helped me map it. And you can see the different collection paths. So we can choose and take as many of these collection paths as we want for our experiments or our business here. So we worked with, I worked with this operations research team here at Cornell to kind of figure out how we could work out the logistics and hopefully keep working that out. I'm working on a system dynamic model to show in principle how the positive feedback loops of getting more people to pay for the sanitation service because the cost is lower if he is taking the job of servicing the toilets off of the back of Fresh Life and making fertilizer, and then you get a positive feedback loop as we put more nutrients into the cornfields, get more corn out, get more maize out, pyrolyze more, get more yield, etc. Photo credit, David. Work in progress. I rarely do anything, but I'm making the darn model, so I want to credit. But thank you, David, for it. So anyway, so there's a lot of challenges I mentioned, of which sociocultural are obviously leading lights there. So just to say that, how do we change how we think and feel about our excreta? This is a tiny slice of the porta potties. If you've ever been to Slope Day, porta potties as far as the eye can see. I should make a video of how many. I mean, you can even have cuter porta potties than that, for heaven's sake. So we really want to do some, go big to collect our pee here. We did a little collection effort at Porch Fest one time. These two young women were the only people who took the time to look at my technical information around the subject. They turned out to be Cornell engineers, and they got us into the Cornell Chronicle for their Planned Parenthood app. I'm super obsessed with potties. Yeah, Johannes is probably gonna roll his eyes, like shut up about the potty. But how to make the potty experience more fun and beautiful and save the world while you're peeing. So we got a couple of collection points here. Cornell, a public health student, has helped us make some nice propaganda about that. So just collecting once a week off a couple of spots. Please contribute to Plant Science and Emerson. She also made some more outward leaning, sort of gardener oriented propaganda here. Not sure we've had any impact. The Soil Factory is sort of all about this sort of subject, and Johannes put on this workshop where we made all these cute kitty books and art products around circular bionutrient economy. Sorry to keep giving you credit, Johannes, but really making this East African circular bionutrient economy network happen. So it's got a biochar and excreta component. This is the carbon trader showing us how it's done with this ridiculous but very enlightening skit they put on. That's the Cornell delegation, David and others. The Rich Earth Institute gets credit, I think, for bringing a global network together. We just had that 10th annual summit. Christina was there in person. Many of us there were there virtually. But they're really making a very dynamic, many-dimensional community come to life there. So what's it really going to take to drive change? We talk about the opportunities, local nutrient value, nutrient sovereignty, environmental health, us and our fabulous activities. But really, maybe it's the PFAS crisis where we can't land apply our product anymore, and there's no carbon going back to the land. More than half of U.S. biosolids are now land applied. We now recognize the hazards if you bring your bodily nutrients pre-contaminated with all sorts of gross things, including PFAS. I think if a few wastewater treatment plants get hurt by these major storm effects, people are going to think twice about putting in the many billions of dollars it takes to put up one plant. See whether there's a disaster or not, sea levels rise, and then 10 million people are out of service on the US coast if the water goes up 3 feet. Long before they're washing away the plants, it's going to corrode them and put them out of business. 10 million people with 3 meters, a heck of a lot more with more than that. And then just even maintaining wastewater treatment plants and running them costs 1 to 2% of the global energy budget. But I really think that we've got to play our role here. We've got to show how it's done. Christine and I are teaching a class about this, but can we please get us nutrient producers serving the nutrient users, the farms and whatnot, learning how to use these different transformation methods, using our food waste and excreta more creatively. Anyway, it's a journey, but hopefully, we'll individually transition through this disgust to comedy, to embrace collectively from this sort of dealing with nutrients as a problem to dealing with them as a bloody resource, and seeing that as part of the wider transition to a circular economy. Thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't leave longer, but
Well, really excited about the ideas you presented, really interesting. I know you said you didn't want to focus too much on the issue of pharmaceuticals in the urine, but I do have a concern about particularly hormones and birth control hormones that I know come out in urine and are very prevalent, particularly, places like the United States. And I'm wondering if you envision some kind of regulatory testing either for plants or for urine going on to plants. How would we make sure that we're not getting into another loop of, contaminants spreading like happened with biosolids or sludge?
well, the hormones are such a identifiable and particular question. I think we just ask and answer that question.
Yeah.
The problem I have is that there's so many pharmaceuticals out there that if you take it as a class, it's much more difficult to answer. But you can assay for hormones probably with a simple ELISA or something. I mean, you can ask that question. So I haven't, but I think it's very practical to ask that question. Does it get into the food or not, and to what extent?
It seems like there'd have to be some regular testing, not just a one-time thing. If it's a regular application that we're using as a food system supplement, then how would we?
I think you can ask as a science question, to what extent do pharmaceuticals come through the soil, plant, food axis? I think that's something you could ask, and then you don't have to test every food item. It does or does not come through. If it does come through, then we have to pull the nitrogen out, the phosphorus out, without the whole gamish, right? So,
Gotcha.
and that's very doable. That's what we're, Johannes, I'm giving Johannes that angle. I mean, I work on that too, but in principle, I'm sort of a dump it on person. But I take your point that if you've got a specific hypothesis, you can test it, and then you can know it's not going to suddenly start accumulating in plants when it doesn't accumulate in plants, right? So I do think that if you have a particular system and a particular hypothesis or a particular question, then we should definitely address it. And then it's probably actually known, and I just don't happen to have it on there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It strikes me there must be a lot of research on this in China. When I go to villages in China and I visit friends' houses, it's the recyclable toilet, and it's been going for a long, long time. And my point is they must have done also research on these things that are now coming into the stream. So I'm just wondering.
Absolutely. I mean, they get credit for like the time immemorial category for sure. They're sort of the, have kept their food system going for all of time with that very explicitly as an accepted practice. More lately, I see it, unfortunately, that they're kind of going modern and to some extent walking away from that, but it's still going on in the hinterlands. And they are a part of that dynamic research ecosystem for sure. If you're tracking the literature, you can bank on them being really doing a lot of cool stuff. A lot of it's frankly, over my head, but I mean, but credit to them for going into it. And yeah, I had actually hoped to go to China last year to sort of do a circular economy tour, partly to be like trying to lobby to not have them walk away from their historical ownership of the topic, but take credit and pride in that maybe, and recognize the fact that they are in fact are on the innovations frontier for it.
Any other questions for Rebecca? Give her one more round of applause.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.